Hello everyone, I'm back. It's time for another ranking video. You've seen me rank every episode of each individual classic series, and you've seen me rank every classic episode overall. Now it's time to rank every classic series as a whole. If you recall those earlier videos, then you may have an idea of roughly how I feel about each series and where they might go in this ranking, and some of this may not be so surprising. In case you didn't know, I only consider series 1 to 5 to be the classic series on a personal level, because everything that came out after Magic Railroad just doesn't feel the same to me. It's just not my thing. If you disagree and consider 6 and 7 classic, then that's fine, but I don't. In future, I may go ahead and make individual full reviews for each series, but in the meantime, please enjoy this one. If your ranking is different to mine, then please tell me how wrong I am, and let me know your own ranking in the comments. Now, on to the video. Now, this should come as no surprise if my other videos are still fresh in your mind, but Series 3 is honestly my least favourite of the classics. That's not to say it's bad. Far from it actually, but it's still my least favourite for a reason. Let's start with the positives first. I really like the new characters introduced here, like Oliver, Toad, Bulgy and Mavis. They're all great. The set design is awesome, but that's not exactly something that's unique to this series. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it though. Some of the backdrops in Series 3 are absolutely beautiful, particularly the lovely skyboxes. Some of these episodes are really good, like Mavis, Toby's Tightrope, One Good Turn, All at Sea, Heroes and Escape. These are episodes I'm happy to rewatch whenever. Even the ones I don't love, like Henry's Forest, at least do things to expand the characters. Unfortunately, that's where my positives end. Series 3 has quite a few episodes that are not adapted from Audrey's work, instead taking inspiration from stories written in the Thomas and Friends magazine by Andrew Brenner. I'm not saying he's a horrible writer because I've never read the rest of the magazine stories, but all these episodes are just so boring to me, without much happening at all. Time for Trouble, No Joke for James, Thomas Gets Bumped, they're all underwhelming episodes that don't really feel like they have a point to them. No interesting sequences and just feel like filler. Series 3 is definitely a more laid back slice of life series than the other four, with a greater amount of chilled out episodes that have the engines getting into minor hijinks or situations without big consequences. This is fine, and it's good to have a nice balance mixed in with the exciting or hard-hitting episodes. It's a show for kids after all. A show about the lives of working engines on a railway. And of course it's not always going to be danger and excitement. I get that. In fact, this is actually a positive of another series I'll talk about later on, but I just find most of the episodes here so boring and uneventful. The set design and colours are a lot more vibrant and saturated compared to what came before, and to be honest I miss that dirtier, more industrial look of Series 2. This feels like a storybook come to life, which I guess is extremely appropriate given what we're talking about here. I don't really like the music that much in Series 3 either. 1 and 2 had this synthy 80s stuff, and from 3 onwards Mike and Junior moved to a more orchestral sound of the technology. The music they came up with in Series 4 and 5 sounded awesome, but the stuff you hear in 3 doesn't really do anything for me, with a few exceptions. Michael Angelis' narration doesn't really appeal to me here either, and it's just like the music where it got way better in 4 and 5, but there's just something about it here that doesn't sound quite right in my ears. Maybe he sounds a bit overly enthusiastic or excitable, I'm not really sure. His tone really takes off in Series 4 and truly peaks in Series 5 though. To me, Series 3 feels like an awkward transitioning period between what I like to call the Ringo and Angelis era, meaning 1 and 2, and then 3, 4 and 5. Everything new in this series feels like an inferior version of what we got in 4 and 5, I think. The new music, the new narration, the non-Audrey stories, it's like a test pilot for what came afterwards, and I'm part of the screening audience that didn't think too much of it. I'm so sorry, Series 3 fans. Please forgive me. Moo. I think being the very first series of Thomas and Friends gives some leeway, but I try to judge it on its own merits. Series 1 is an extremely comfy watch, and even though I'm happy to chuck on any of these as comfortable background noise, there's just something about Series 1 in particular that sticks with me. It was the introduction to the core cast of standard gauge characters, with each of them getting a good focus episode for the audience to get to know them. We immediately know that Thomas is cheeky, Gordon is proud, Edward is hard-working but old, James is vain, and all the rest. And by the end, it's like you've known these characters all your life. It does a great job of bringing you into the world of the island of Sodor. Some of the sets may seem a bit simpler compared to even Series 2, and the desaturated greyer colours might make it seem a bit plainer than it actually is. A few of the stories aren't too terribly exciting, and I know people do find them boring, but you know what? I actually love it. Remember, this was the earlier days before things got really crazy, and there are some exciting tales to be told here. There's something I just find really down-to-earth and basic about Series 1 that intrigues me. For instance, there's many occasions throughout where the sound consists of nothing more than background ambience or sound effects, with no music or narration. Here's an example of what I mean. You may find it dull or uninteresting, but I think it's wonderful and quite realistic sounding. If you were really here in this world, you wouldn't be hearing music or narration. You'd be hearing the birds tweeting, the puffing of smoke, and the metallic clanking of machinery. It's really immersive, and it's something unique about Series 1 because the other ones didn't really do this. It's got a good mix of relatively tame stories like Thomas and the Guard, and more action-packed episodes like Dirty Objects or The Flying Kipper. You know, like a real railway might have. This, coupled with what I just mentioned about the sound effects, helps sell Series 1 as maybe the most realistic, grounded, or immersive series of the whole show, in my humble opinion. The fact that it's in 4th place obviously means it's not my favourite, but I think it deserves recognition for everything else. Series 4 expanded the show like it never had been before, as it took us over the mountains, past the rivers, through the woodland, and into the narrow gauge railways. By this point, we'd gotten used to the rolling fields, big stations, and dockyards of the standard gauge, so this was a really nice change of scenery. Scenery is the key word here, because wow, this looks lovely. The production team really went all out here with all types of natural landscapes like dense forests, rivers, and mountains. We'd seen plenty of natural environments before, but Series 4 just relished in it. Because half the series is dedicated to narrow gauge engines, you really get the Sorry, that was my cat. You really get the chance to get immersed in this world, and those 13 episodes feel like a lifetime, in a good way. In terms of characters introduced, Series 4 has my favourite new additions of them all. There's a good variety of newcomers of all different specifications, like the narrow gauge engines, that one horrible diesel, George and Stepney. Some stay longer than others, but they all serve their purpose. I think they're all great. My favourite character of the whole show is introduced here too. The narrow gauge engines especially were great, and from a child's point of view, I think it was a brilliant inclusion because, like the diesels before, it was an introduction to a whole different breed of engine that formed an important part of the railway system both in real life and on Sodor. Although they looked similar to the bigger engines, these were smaller and had entirely different ways of doing things. A world all of their own. Seeing them alongside the bigger engines made you realise just how different they were. So, if Series 4 is so good, why is it in 3rd place? Well, it's because it feels kind of uneven. A big part of this is the way it's structured. The first half of the series revolves around the new setting and characters of the narrow gauge, while the second half is more focused on the familiar setting of the standard gauge that audiences were used to. I'm not a huge fan of the way these episodes are laid out, with the standard gauge stories backloaded like that. It's kind of jarring when you spend a long time with one thing, and then suddenly it shifts over to something else with the next episode. It's almost like 2 series mashed together into one, I think. Personally, I believe it would have felt more natural and paced better if the episodes were arranged in such a way that you'd have a narrow gauge story, then a standard gauge story, and then a narrow one, and then so on. Let's give an example. In Series 4, Grand Puff and Sleeping Beauty are back to back. In Grand Puff, we learn about the Old Maid Sodor Railway and the engines that live there, and then it ends with the railway's closure and the promise of finding out what happens next sometime soon. Will Duke ever be found? Who knows. The very next episode, Sleeping Beauty, begins with a recap of the story we've just seen and pretty quickly concludes the tale of what happened to Duke. I would have put one of the later standard gauge episodes between Grand Puff and Sleeping Beauty, so the question of what happened to Duke could stew in the audience's mind a bit. I'd probably put Bulldog around here too, so we have more tales of the past in between them. Now that I think about it, I think I'd prefer Sleeping Beauty to be way later, so that Duke's return feels more triumphant and earned. Having it later on would make its recap portion feel way more needed. There's actually quite a bit of discussion regarding potential restructuring here, so maybe I'll save that for another video. But just to bring it back around, I think Series 4 was structured a bit weirdly in terms of the episode's layout. Also, some of the standard gauge episodes are also kind of meh. This is a problem I have with Series 2 and 5 as well, but their best episodes were better than the best of Series 4, so that's why they're higher.
Haha, chuckled Percy.
Okay, this is where it gets hard. Do I prefer Series 2 or Series 5? I mean, that's like asking me if I prefer Blaziken or Suicune, Swerve or Shockwave, or Sunday Dinner versus Carbonara. There's so many factors involved that make me love both, so simply picking a favourite is going to take some brain power. To help me decide, build suspense, and definitely not drag out the video length. I'm going to talk about each of them, and then decide afterwards which one is my favourite. For all intents and purposes, Series 2 feels like an upgraded version of Series 1. You've got Ringo narrating, the music, picture quality and sets are very similar, and it feels much like a continuation of Series 1, compared to the huge leap from Series 2 to Series 3. It took the groundwork laid by Series 1 and just improved it. The sets were more detailed with plenty of variety in what we saw. There were plenty of scenic countryside and station views like last time, but Series 2 mixed it up a bit and introduced a lot more industrial locations like bigger harbours, yards and quarries for the engines to work at. These sets had plenty of infrastructure, machinery that gave Sodor a bit of a dirtier, rougher edge. A living, breathing world that had plenty of activity. We really got to see both sides of what a railway would have been like in those days, showing us both scenic, rural routes and urban industrial zones. Of course, as the series went on, we would see the scope of the sets expand even further, but Series 2 deserves recognition for taking what they've done in Series 1 and improving it. The stories got more involved, with the concept of scrapping being the most prominent. This really dragged Sodor further into the real world, as changes and advancements which occurred in real history affected the characters. Edward was frequently noted as being old and worn out, and though he never actually faced the Cutter's Torch himself, he of course became friends with Trevor, who was in that sort of peril himself. And then you've got Donald and Douglas staring down their face, as one of them is destined to be sent back. Or so they think. The biggest factor here is the introduction of diesels onto the railways, with Diesel himself being our first glimpse at these newfangled types of engines. In real life, there were different reactions to diesels, with some seeing them as necessary mechanical improvements on unwieldy and aging steam locomotives, while others thought that they lacked the magic of steam, that powerful oomph factor that made people look so fondly on the old locomotives. This is slightly mirrored in the show, with some engines gazing upon the new diesel with awe and wonder, while Duck is more hesitant and distrustful. The advent of dieselisation was indeed a huge shift on real-life railways, as all the steam engines were scrapped in favour of the new models, so of course this was reflected in the writing. This was expanded on more later, but it really kicked off here. There were nicer diesels too, like Boko and Daisy, showing that even though they were new and potentially replacing other characters, they weren't all evil. History worked differently on Sodor, and steam engines were kept in service along diesel, so it wasn't a total loss. But it's good that the concept wasn't just totally glossed over. It's good to teach kids real lessons in history this way, which may be a good topic for another video soon. Stay tuned. I like most of the characters introduced here. Duck is of course a favourite, with his interesting shape, no-nonsense attitude towards the bossy engines and rivalry with Diesel. His music is also very pleasant. Diesel is the show's first proper antagonist, and makes an awesome first impression with a scheme that really makes you detest him. Boko and Daisy are a nice contrast to Diesel that seem horrible at first but warm up to the others and turn out to be quite nice. Harold introduces us to air vehicles and opens up a whole realm of possibilities for characters now that we have rail, road and airborne representation. Bill and Ben are fun little goblins and Trevor is... there. The music is very much keeping with the style of Series 1, using that synthy 80s style of sound that I'm such a big fan of, as well as all the little musical cues and ditties sprinkled throughout. All the character themes are consistent, with more updates and variations. I'm a big fan of the ones that transition to other themes, like when Percy's theme goes into the Danger theme.
I like.
Every wise engine knows that you cannot trust trucks.
Go on!
Series 2 is fantastic. Series 5 is probably the series that I've spoken the most about in previous videos, and with reason because there's a lot happening here. This is known as the most cinematic series, as it was the team's chance to show what they were made of, before they had to go making a film. You probably know the one. Though there are a handful of episodes I'm not really a big fan of, I think most of the episodes here range from good to bloody brilliant. There's so much spectacle on display here I can gush over. Where do we even begin? Toby and the Flood and Put Upon Percy have those climactic scenes with the characters in real danger. Haunted Henry and Duncan Get Spooked have these wonderfully atmospheric sets that make part of the island seem otherworldly and mysterious, despite probably being relatively plain underneath. Rusty and the Boulder has that scary chase scene and exploding shed. That includes the sets too, which carry on from the diverse weather and environmental changes we've seen before, with episodes having downright beautiful scenery that really show a grander scope of how Sodor looks at all times of the year. My favourite thing about Series 5 is how it expands Sodor like never before seen. We get history, lore, legends and tales that really draw you in and make you want to learn more. I've already spoken about them at length in their own dedicated videos, which you should check out by the way. But Duncan Gets Spooked and Rusty and the Boulder are two episodes that really showcase the more mysterious angle of Sodor, that its inhabitants may be more aware of than they let on. One involves the possible on-screen drowning of an engine and its ghost haunting the site of its demise, while the other has a potentially sentient boulder that lurks high in the mountains. Both of the episodes have other interesting aspects of them, besides the creepy stuff, like how many other fatal accidents there could have been, or the dangers of expansion and destruction in a natural environment. So many layers. Again, I talk about these more in dedicated videos. There's a sinister history between Stepney and Arya Burt that we're not privy to, but it's implied that he must have escaped from them before. This, along with the actual events of the episodes, tell us that there are in fact diesels on Sodor that are more malicious than the original one, and actively try to kill steam engines. I mean, wow, that is harsh, that is. Series 5 gives us all these glimpses into a wider world that only fleshes out Sodor even more, beyond just introducing new characters or locations. It's like if Thomas the Tank was a sandwich that already had some ham and cheese. Series 5 took it apart and added some seasoning, maybe some crisps on the side, and a nice cold glass of Pepsi Max. It just expanded it and gave us extra. Was that a good analogy? I don't know, but now I'm hungry. When it comes to picking my absolute favourite series, there's a few things that could pull me either way, but eventually I had to reach a decision. After plenty of contemplation, my favourite series is Series 2. I did not choose lightly, because there are things 5 does wonderfully, like its more expansive scope, visually spectacular episodes and world building, and overall production, but I just find Series 2 to be a more enjoyable watch. I can chuck on any of the episodes and for 20 minutes all is well. Even a story I don't really like, such as Thomas and Trevor, can be nice background noise because of Ringo's narration, the music, and even just the way the show looks. This was something I couldn't really explain very well, but you know how the first 2 series just look different to 3 onwards? They've got that softer, dirtier, bit more greyer visual style compared to 3 and 5, when it became a lot more saturated and colourful. Again, if you prefer that kind of thing, that's fine. Series 5 is a lot more impressive from a technical production level, so in that regard it's probably a superior product. But I'm not really a big fan of judging something against something that was released years later with better technology, because that's just unfair. I'd rather judge something on its own merits as it was when it was released. The things it does well will always be well. Michael Angelis was a great narrator who was at his best in Series 5, but I've always found Ringo to be more pleasant on my ears. It's weird because I feel like Michael is probably objectively better with his different accents and tones, but Ringo is just nicer for me to listen to. While on the topic of audio again, it's no secret that I prefer the musical style of Series 2 over what came afterwards. I feel like it gives the show its own unique style. Like, you could just close your eyes and hear a few of those synthy notes, and you'd immediately recognise it as being from Thomas. Series 5 had some really great musical tracks, like honestly it really does, but I just prefer the synthy stuff. Despite loving Series 5's really dramatic stories, I think 2 did a better job of balancing the exciting and calmer stories. It feels like a lot more like a collection of snapshots of life on a working railway, with accidents like engines falling into harbours or having crashes, alongside calmer tales like an engine being saved from scrap by a nice vicar, or some cows causing trouble on the line. Seems like an average week for a busy island, right? Contrast this with Series 5 where it's like slice of life, then epic action set piece. Might be exaggerating a bit, but you know what I mean. Series 2 just had a more even presentation of stories, I think. So there you have it, my ultimate final ranking of the classic series. Hopefully I've been able to articulate my feelings and explain my thoughts to you in such a way that this ranking makes sense, and you can understand why I feel the way I do, regardless of whether or not you actually agree with my opinions. If you don't, that's fine. Be sure to let me know in the comments. I love reading comments from watchers because it gives me some feedback, and an idea of the sort of stuff I should be making more of. Thank you for watching, and please tune in next time to hear me talk about more stuff. Thank you, and have a great day.